South Korea is seriously concerned about the country's impending demographic doom amid the country's rapid population decline and shrinking birth rate that continue to shatter its own world record. But some experts say that the media is making lopsided lamentations, blowing things out of proportions, overlooking the benefits of slower population growth. They also add, it's not just about the numbers. For some fresh insight on population decline, we now connect with Professor Joel Cohen, head of the Laboratory of Populations at the Rockefeller and Columbia Universities. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Cohen.
Thank you for having me.
We want to start this conversation based on your research. You have examined population decline from a fresh angle, and in a recent report, you mentioned that slower population growth signals successes and benefits, and that a large or rapidly growing population is hardly necessary or sufficient for prosperity. Can you first tell us about your own research?
I've studied how fertility levels and population growth rates interact with a country's culture, economy, and environment. Most of the countries with fertility below replacement level, and many of the 55 countries or areas that the United Nations projects will decrease by at least 1% in the next 30 years, are highly prosperous and peaceful. While many of the most rapidly growing countries with the highest fertility are poor and some, unfortunately, torn by violence. Finland is ranked the happiest country in the world, and it has a total fertility rate, or average number of children per woman per lifetime, of 1.4, which is far below replacement of 2.1. And it's below the fertility level in the United States, although it's higher than the 0.78 most recently in South Korea. So much depends on how a society responds to lower fertility and population decline. Suppose a town has fewer children. Should schools be closed, leading to empty school buildings and fewer jobs for teachers? Or should class sizes be reduced, leading to closer, more intensive interactions between students and teachers, and perhaps to better learning for children? These choices and many other choices like them determine the effects of low fertility and population decline.
In the case of Seoul City and in the context of South Korea, there is a disproportionate distribution of population, which may deem that difficult. But the larger question, I guess, remains the same. Maybe we should view these policies differently. Dr. Cohen, your report does provide a little bit of relief for South Korea. It's a country where a dwindling population is a grave concern. As you've mentioned, 0.78, that is the fertility rate in South Korea, the lowest amongst OECD countries. But can the findings of your study be equally applied to the South Korean context?
I think so. South Korea is investing in its people through intensive education. And studies of 40 of the wealthy countries have shown that it's possible for the population size to decrease while wealth income per person increases. And that happens when there's increasing productivity. South Korea has demonstrated amazing successes. I'll give you a few. The life expectancy of males is 80 years. The life expectancy at birth of females is 86 years. These are phenomenal figures and have been achieved in less than a century. The infant mortality rate, the fraction of newborn babies who die before they reach age 1 year is among the lowest in the world. It's only 2 per 1,000. So these are tremendous successes. There are challenges, though. For example, as I understand it, 24% of Korea's population is aged 60 plus. Now, if you need more workers, one possibility is to prolong working life. Some people like that idea, and some people don't. In France, it's a very controversial notion, but there are choices to be made. One more example. In 2021, about 52% of adult women were in the labor force, while 73% of adult men were in the labor force. So women face a choice about whether to work. There is potentially a lot more labor supply in Korea than is being engaged in the economy now. And Korea faces choices.
I think you highlight important points, Dr. Cohen, because Korea continues to offer fragmentary support, including childbirth grants and related subsidies, but it really hasn't done much to reverse signs of declining birth rate. But maybe the focus should be allowing women who can work to have the option to do so. So it maybe alludes to more child care, not just about the initial payment for child rearing. Can we also talk about some of the other economic benefits? In your report, you analyzed that slower population growth increases economic opportunities for women and minority groups and exerts upward pressure on wages, especially for unskilled labor. Also, it could raise capital per person, raising productivity and pushing GDP per person to grow faster. How is that possible?
Before I try to answer that question, I want to agree strongly with a comment that you made just before. Your comment was that maybe there should be more attention to enabling women who want to work to do so and to have support for the care of their children. I think you have touched on a very important point, and only a few countries in the world have taken your point seriously enough to act on it. And the countries that have find that the fertility is not as extremely low as it is in countries where women are not supported to be able to work and care for their children. So thank you for that comment. Now, coming to your question, there's a wonderful paper by two distinguished demographers called Ron Lee and Andrew Mason, and they analyzed 40 well-off countries. They showed three things. One, fertility well above replacement is most beneficial for government budgets because of the taxes. Two, fertility near replacement is most beneficial for standards of living when the analysis includes the effects of age structure on families as well as governments. And three, fertility below replacement should maximize per capita consumption when the cost of providing capital for a growing labor force is taken into account. So the government's incentives are not aligned with the incentives of individuals, and that's a big problem. The government needs to adapt its goals instead of declaring a demographic crisis. It needs to recognize the benefits to individuals and families of not having to produce more roads, more ports, more machines, more factories. That's costly.
And in regards to the costliness, it's not just the things that we see and are able to measure immediately. We want to talk about the environmental consequences too. A report that we came across also says that in the case of the United States, slower population growth would lessen the country's contributions to climate change, biodiversity loss, deforestation, and pollution, also making it easier for governments and various groups to actually respond more fully to increasing demands. Do you believe that population decline is simply better for planet Earth?
It is not only the numbers of people, but how we people choose to live. If the numbers go down and we become more careless of the environment, then population decline is not better for planet Earth. But if the numbers go down at the same time that people take care of the environment, then it's beneficial. So it's not just numbers. For example, shall we use single-use plastic shopping bags, or shall we use reusable, biodegradable shopping bags? To get to work, shall we walk, take a bicycle, use public transport, or drive one person in a big sports utility vehicle? How do we move around? And how do we generate energy? By burning coal, or petroleum, or natural gas, or by wind turbines, or by solar, or by geothermal? And what do we do with our waste? And how do we manage our cities? Now, South Korea is 80% of the people in South Korea, I think it's 82%, something like that, live in the cities.
Right.
If the cities grow as they will in the developing countries, in the poorer countries, will they grow by increasing density within a controlled area, or will they grow by increasing area, by sprawl, like Los Angeles, California? Well, cities occupy about 3% of the world's land, and many cities are located in prime agricultural land because that's where the food was. If the cities double, are they going to double in density on the same 3%? Or are they going to eat another 3% of the best agricultural land? These are choices that we make not individually, but collectively, through our governments, through our businesses, and through our own behavior.
Dr. Cohen, our last question. Then what is your advice to the South Korean government policymakers that is now rolling out drastic measures to tackle what it calls a demographic crisis?
Well, I think it's important for people to remember in Korea, and I hesitate to give advice, but here's what I think. The population of the Republic of Korea was 20 million people in 1950. It was 36 million people in 1975. It was 47 million people in the year 2000. According to the medium projection of the United Nations, by 2050, if things go as expected, the population of Korea, South Korea, will decline to 46 million, roughly what it was in the year 2000. Sorry, by 2050.
Right.
And by 2100, it would decline to 24 million, more than Korea's population in 1950. So there's not a burning fire here. Take time and experiment to see what supports women in their desire to work and have families. What supports men? Maybe the men have some interest in this too. Consider experiments with increasing the working age. Continue investments in the education of people throughout life, and investments in new technologies to adapt to an aging population that might enable people to work longer. Invest in smarter, less expensive housing so young people can find a place to live that they can afford. And maybe even encourage people to consider getting more involved, men and women, in child rearing. Those are some thoughts. I'd like to know what you think.
I actually agree on every single point. And now there is definitely a sense of panic amongst how we, the media, deliver the news too, because it's largely focused on numbers without proper context, analysis, and conversations like such. But I've always found that it is not only disheartening but misleading to say that it's a demographic crisis and we're throwing money at women to have more children, but they're not taking it. And there is a sense of maybe a little bit of guilt there. However, I set it aside, realizing that fundamentally, I think what I want to achieve for myself is beneficial for the country at large too.
Good.
Dr. Cohen,
I agree. I agree it's not a crisis. It's a challenge. And people can face challenges. Korea has done miraculously well over the last, since World War II. It's amazing what Korea has done. And it will be amazing what Korea chooses to do if they take time, if people take time and think first.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cohen. I think this was a much needed discussion. We appreciate your insights.
And I thank you for your interest in these problems, which are really important.
Thank you very much. We spoke to Professor Joel Cohen. He's the head of the Laboratory of Populations at the Rockefeller and Columbia Universities. If you're listening to our program using the podcast service, just a reminder that we do go live Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. Korea Standard Time. So tune in and help us make the show more informative by giving us your input. See you bright and early on Good Morning Seoul.